Almighty God, merciful Father who art in heaven, my Creator, my earth, to give you the glory because you take care of every living creature that ever walked on the face of this earth. Father, there is none like you, none that compare to you. And we just pray and ask that we be able to walk in your way, do your will, and be forever in the palms of your hands.
This is Cousin Margaret Rose Tucker. I'm presenting Stories of the Heart, The Drivers of Oklahoma, 1889 to 2018. Africans were brought to the U.S. on slave ships. They were shackled. They were processed in the ship like a can of sardines, head to toe, toe to head. They would vomit, have their waste spill on each other as they sat in the hull of ships. Many of them did not survive the passage from the motherland. Those who were so sure that freedom was great tossed themselves to the side of the ship and drowned rather than become slaves. Many of the Choctaw Nation marched with the Cherokee along the Trail of Tears. They came out of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Over 10,000 of those people who traveled lost their lives. They came into the United States as Native Americans coming by force through the evil President Andrew Jackson in the deadliest winter that they had ever seen. Many Choctaw settled in Oklahoma and became huge ranchers. They were educated in the East and became wealthy. And they, by a twist of fate, took Africans as slaves. We bring this information to our story because our ancestor, Charlotte Sias Driver, was a slave of the Choctaw. Charlotte Sias Driver was my great-great-grandmother. She was the mother of my great-grandfather, Felix Wesley Driver. We found information which shows her in an interview before the Dawes Commission. It is from the Department of the Interior, Commissioner to the 5 Civilized Tribes, Muskogee, Indian Territory, August 30th, 1906. And in summary, her interview says, I came before the commission at about age 60. At that time, I was in Taft, Oklahoma, for 2 months. I came to the commission with my son, Felix Wesley Driver, to apply to be citizens of the Choctaw Nation by blood. Charlotte says, I am Choctaw by blood, but I have a little colored blood in me. My father was Josias. He was part colored and black. My mother was Liza Goff Sias. She was not colored. She was part Indian. She was Choctaw, and she taught me the Choctaw language and how to prepare the Choctaw food. But I was born in Tishomingo, which was Chickasaw territory. I lived among the Choctaw. I have 2 sisters in the Choctaw Nation where they have lived all their lives. I was a slave to the Choctaw. I lived at Fort Smith, Arkansas for 15 to 20 years before I came to Taft. I have 5 children. They are Felix Wesley, Annie, age 36, Maggie, age 34, Mary, age 32, and Callie, age 24. This is information summarized from the interview with the Dawes Commission. Charlotte was born about 1840, and she died June 23rd, 1930, at about age 89. As you can see from the United States Federal Census record of 1910, Charlotte's name was spelled S-C-K-A-R-L-E-T-T, Driver. I'm not sure if the census taker was literate. In this record, it shows in 1910 that Charlotte was 65, and it shows her birth year of 1845. But it also shows, and there is one slight error here where it says father's name is Callie Driver. That is incorrect. We noted that Callie is her son, age 29. Blanche is her daughter, 22. Theodore is 6. Bertha May is 4. Louisa is 3. Charlie is 2. And Scarlett Elizabeth, and they spelled it again, Skarlett, is apparently a newborn. It shows 0 as her age. And then they show my great-great-grandmother, Charlotte, as 65, and then Annabelle at age 7. In the 1920 United States Federal Census record, it shows Charlotte as a widow, and they spell her name this time Sharlett. It shows all of her children, and it references their ages. By way of documentation, in the Arkansas Death Index, 1914 to 1950, it shows Charlotte as death as being recorded June 30th, 1930 in Sebastian County, Arkansas. Now, let's talk about Richard Driver, my great-great-grandfather. He was Charlotte's husband. The federal census record of 1870 shows him at age 30 and documenting his birth year around 1840. He was born in Washington, D.C. He had moved at this time to Marion, Sebastian County, Arkansas. It shows him as a farm laborer. It shows his wife as Charlotta this time. It shows his son Joseph at age 4, Felix, my great-grandfather, at age 2, and Annie at 4 months old. In the census record of 1880, 10 years later, it shows my great-great-grandfather as Dick Driver at age 50. But now it shows him as head of his household and as a farmer. So in that 10-year time span, he was able to accrue land, he was able to amass help and build his farm. And we notice that it shows Charlotte spelled Charlotte this time at age 34, with Dick Driver at age 50. And their children are listed, including Ada, Maggie, and Mary, and Lily. At this time, from looking at the record, we assume that some of those other children were grown and had moved out of the home. Next, let's talk about Henderson Ross, my great-grandmother's father. This is the father of Gertrude Ross Driver. In the census record out of Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, in Douglas County, it shows that Henderson Ross in 1865 was a laborer and that he had several children. Those children are documented in this record as Angeline, Malon, Elizabeth, Edward, Amanda, and Abe Lincoln. And in the very bottom of the record, it shows Hannah Ross, and we realize from this birth date and age that she's 85. This is Henderson Ross's mother. We have traced her over to Kentucky, where we believe she is the child of the slave master. We need to continue research in this area, and we hope the young people who come after us will pick up at this point. In the census record of 1870, 5 years later, it shows that Henderson Ross is no longer a laborer, but at age 50 owns his own farm. He has farm hands, and his property is valued at $1,200, which is considered well-to-do in those days. His personal property is valued at $1,025. During the Oklahoma Land Run of 1889, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, Felix Wesley Driver and Gertrude Ross Driver, staked 84 acres of land in Oklahoma. My cousins and I reenacted this land run on May 26, 2018, in remembrance of them. We show the mare with her hand up to signal the beginning of the run. We show our cousins getting ready to run. We show our cousins staking claims, and we show little children staking claims. These are all driver descendants.
The driver, my grandmother, and I stake a claim for my mother, Margie Arlette Miller Tucker, and I stake a claim for my ancestor, Felix Driver, and I stake a claim for my ancestor, Gertrude Driver, and I stake a claim, and I stake a claim, and I stake a claim, and I stake a claim for the 15 children.
Amen.
This is Stories of the Heart, the Drivers of Oklahoma, 1889 to 2018. I would like for you to use your imagination as you listen and watch as driver family members act out roles of their ancestors. Welcome to Taft, Oklahoma, the ancestral home of my great-grandparents, Felix Wesley Driver and Gertrude Ross Driver. I'm Margaret Rose Tucker, granddaughter of their 11th child, Leila Driver Miller. My great-grandparents came to Taft during the Oklahoma Great Land Run when it was known as Twine Territory in Indian Territory in 1889. It is an all-black town, one of 50, where now only 13 remain. They staked a claim of 84 acres on the Arkansas River, where they raised cows and chickens. They had horses and all kinds of animals. They also farmed and raised vegetables, corn and wheat and peas. They lived there into the mid-40s and raised 17 children. Behind me is the State Hospital for Negro Insane, built in 1934. It is called the Red Top, as you can see from the color of the roof. This is where my mom received help when she was ill, and it was a safe place for her in 1953 and 1959. You can see the steeple of the new First Baptist Church, and I'm standing on the site of the original First Baptist Church, where my great-grandparents were active members. This is Moton High School. It was built in 1906. It still stands. This is where I attended 4th grade. There were probably grades 1 through 8 in my class. I have a mental picture of it, but it's hard for me to see anything other than that classroom and the different levels of kids. This was my first year away from my family as a cluster prior to 1953. The sign behind me says former home of DB and O. This was built in 1909 for orphans and sometimes for children whose parents left Oklahoma to seek work. For my family in 1953, my sisters and brothers and I lived here as well as in 1959. Early in the morning at 5 a.m. we collected eggs. Our brothers milked cows. There were lots of children in the dorms. This was our home. We called it Dibana. This is City Hall, where my great-grandfather served as mayor, and we understand that he was instrumental in building City Hall. This building was registered in the National Register of Historic Places at NR 84003330, and it still stands. Behind me are 84 acres staked by Felix Wesley Driver and Gertrude Ross Driver during the Oklahoma Land Run. In 1889, we show Gertrude staking a claim and standing and looking at all of the land that she and Felix have amassed. That's enough, Felix. You can see how extensive the land is. They raised those 17 children here. They raised their cattle, they raised crops, and they lived here all the way into the 40s. This was their home. This is where my mother, Margie Arlette Tucker, lived. This is where my cousin, Catherine Jenkins Scott, lived as children. This was their home, and this is where they worked and lived and labored, and where many of our stories come from. In about 1899, we found a document which shows that Felix rents a house from William Grimmett. This looks as though Felix was farming but still leasing from someone in the Taft area. This document is from the Department of the Interior, commissioned to the 5 civilized tribes, Muskogee Land Office, dated August 1st, 1899. About 1908, we believe that our great-grandfather, Felix Driver, became sheriff of Taft, Oklahoma. About 1910, we believe he became one of the first mayors of Taft, Oklahoma.
Son, you didn't have to steal that hog. Gertrude and I would have gave you a ham out of the smokehouse. I was gonna have you help me fence the back 40. Now I'm gonna have to take you in. Turn around, put your hands behind your back. Come on, through here. Grimmett, you need to file a deed with Muskogee County. Willie T. Warrior and Grimmett, we need to name our town. Also, we need to make plans to build a city hall.
In 1918, we show a document, which is a school record, from Taft Agency, signed by Felix Driver, registering his children in school. And in 1918, he shows Laura, born January 5th, 1911, St. Elmo, born March 11th, 1909, Leela, my grandmother, born August 16th, 1904, Helen, born April 20th, 1906, Fanny, born December 26th, 1903, Patterson, born November 7th, 1902, and DeWitt, born June 14, 1900. We also show Felix, born September 8th, 1911. Our records reflect that Felix and Gertrude had 19 children. In the past, we thought it was 14 or 15. Our cousin Catherine said she thought it was 17. This record indicates that children named Laura and Patterson have never been documented in our research, and so we show that those 2 children were children we were not aware of. We notice also that Laura was born January 5th, 1911, and Felix born September 8th, 1911. So Gertrude had 2 children in 1 year. Felix Driver was also one of the first Sunday school superintendents at First Baptist Church in Taft.
The parable of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus answered and saying, a certain man went down of Jerusalem to Joshua and fell among thieves who stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead.
You know how to answer, Papa.
In this segment, we explore the life of Gertrude, our great-grandmother, and we give this story based on stories told through oral tradition from my mother. These are stories that were told to me. My mother came to see Grandma Gertrude smoking a ham and putting a rag with fire on it around the ham to smoke out something. She realized she was smoking maggots out of the ham. My mother was considered a smart aleck. She was considered too smart for her own good, and she and my great-grandmother Gertrude had a rocky relationship. In this scene, my mother, Margie, says, "Grandma, you can't feed us that ham because it's filthy."
What you doing, Grandma?
I'm getting the bugs out.
Ew, those are maggots. At Moton, they say you can't feed us that.
Smart Margaret, get to the closet. In the next scene, Great-Grandma Gertrude always touted that she was a virtuous woman and she was a very proud person. And she saw herself as wealthy and above people because she owned 84 acres of land with her husband, Felix. In the virtuous woman scene, she does not understand why anyone would have children without being married. And so she talks about this with my mother, Margie, and my mother's retort was unacceptable.
My girls are coming here with these bastards and these ne'er-do-well men, and I was a virtuous woman when I got married.
Well, you should have been, Grandma. You were just 13.
Go to the closet, Margaret!
In the scene, Sal eats the piglet. My mother said her grandmother was not tolerant, and she was tired of the mama sow eating her piglets after they were born. But I suspect this is God's way of making sure that nature takes care of its own. I believe that when sows eat piglets, it's because those piglets are weaklings, and the mother knows that it will die and will not be able to survive.
Mama, the sow ate the piggy.
Not this time. You'll not get this one.
In Nasty Girl, my mother observes teenagers having sex in one of the rooms, and she comes to tell her grandmother, Grandma Gertrude. Grandma Gertrude is not happy with this news and sees my mother, Margie, as a tattler, a nasty girl.
Ooh, Grandma, the teens are in there doing married stuff.
You nasty tattling girl, go to the closet.
Is this right, Papa?
Good job, boy.
Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the first child born to Felix and Gertrude, and he was actually born in 1889, December of that year. The land run was in April of that year. In the documentation of our history, it's apparent that Gertrude was probably pregnant when she did the land run, probably pregnant with Hezekiah. Hezekiah probably was strong-willed and had a determined spirit, like we believe his father Felix did. My mother told me that Hezekiah helped his dad add a room to their home. Cousin Catherine says the home was made from stone. When Hezekiah was probably about 18 or 19, and I'm looking at his marriage picture, his marriage photograph, he looks like he's about 40. So I'm assuming he was probably about 18, no older than 20, when he went to Grandpa Felix and said he wanted his room from the house. And he had been a witness in a federal criminal appeals court case in Taft in 1915, which would have made him about 16. And Grandpa Felix said to him, I know you were a witness in that criminal trial, but I am still your father, and you're not taking this room from this house. But his son was strong-willed. My mother said Hezekiah hooked his wagon and his horses up and strapped leather belt around that room and pulled it from the house. That is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. But that is a story from my mother, Margie, about Hezekiah. Emma Driver is the oldest daughter of Felix and Gertrude Driver. She was my mother's favorite aunt. She babysat my mother and the other younger Driver children. My mother named my eldest sister Emma Jean for her. My mother said that she always took good care of them, And you can see from the picture that she's holding Felix Martin when he's an infant. This dates this picture at 1928. And you can see that she has a loving, caring look on her face in regards to him. The next scene, Mary's Restaurant, takes us to about 1920. And we call this scene with In Between Guy. Aunt Mary's Restaurant was on Greenwood Avenue in Tulsa, where the wealthy black businesses thrived. This story was given to me by Deborah James, the great-granddaughter of Mary, and she said that her great-grandmother's restaurant was burned to the ground along with other businesses and that they fled desperately for their lives. My mother retells the story in that the newspaper tried to underplay what happened during the killing of the blacks on Greenwood at what they called Black Wall Street. There were not just a few deaths. My mother said there was an open grave with 400 bodies in it, and that the black people who were killed, that they tried to cover up the murder and the slaughter and the genocide, and that they filled that open grave, and most of those people were not funeralized, and there was no proper burial for them. This is story, again, told through oral tradition from Deborah and my mom, Margie.
What can I get you?
Let me see. Pork chop, catfish, chicken. But I'm in between.
Here's some. Go ahead and eat.
I'll pay you back next week. Mr. Felix is giving me some work. No charge.
Hush, son.
This story was told to me by Catherine Jenkins Scott. In the deal, Catherine says that Grandpa Felix and Grandpa Steve Whitley made a deal, and the next thing she knew, the next thing they knew, Aunt Mary was married to Steve Whitley. From what we understand, she was not a willing bride, and so we think that the deal was made to ensure that she was not, to ensure that she was married.
Steve, do you take Mary as your lawful wedded wife?
I do.
Mary, do you take Steve as your lawful wedded husband?
I do.
You may kiss the bride.
Mary, Margie, and her brood. By 1960, my mother had 7 children and was pregnant. And in this scene, we see her come to visit Aunt Mary. Aunt Mary is an older lady now, about 60. She was full-figured and had huge bosoms. And she was a unique person. She loved us. She had compassion for my mom. I don't care how many times we came to visit. She always welcomed her. She always prepared a meal for us. And she always made us feel like her place was our home. She had a perspective about life that was unique. Everything was black and white for her. There was no in-between for Aunt Mary. And she called things like she saw them. She did not pretend that things were perfect when they were not perfect. In this scene, we see her teasing my mom about being pregnant. We also see her being who she was, candid. She decided to bathe, and she politely put a big tin tub in the middle of the floor, and Sheila McCormick says a number 3 tin tub in the middle of the floor, put hot water in it, and proceeded to undress. My mother, being the proper person she was, said, "Aunt Mary, you can't undress in front of the children." Aunt Mary said, "They've seen naked folk before," and she proceeded to bathe. Aunt Mary was who she was.
It's me, Aunt Mary Margie.
Come table. Look at you, Robert Rose. Margie, you always complaining about that husband of yours. He ain't so bad. Every time I see you, you got that belly stuck up over your head.
Aunt Mary, you know how it is. Every time I shake hands with him, I get pregnant.
I understand, baby. Let's get something to eat.
Aunt Mary, what's that on your nose?
Oh, something that'll kill me one day.
Aunt Mary, don't you think someone should be here with you in case something happens?
Oh, Margie, the county ain't gonna let me lay up here and stink. What are you doing?
Locking the door.
Child, anybody want me will come through lock and key to get me. I'm gonna go get a pot of water.
Wait, Aunt Mary, you can't get undressed in front of the children.
Girl, these children done seen naked folks before.
Seance. My grandmother, Leela Driver, believed in life after death and that people could be called from the beyond. It's a scary notion to me, but that is what she believed. And my mother told this story. She went to a seance with my grandma, Leela, and during the seance, my mother became frightened because the seance lady was trying to conjure up spirits from the past. In this scene, she actually foretells the death of my grandmother, who died in a fire. My mother had said to her, "Leela, Mama, don't try to cook." My grandmother had MS, and she tried to go to the stove to cook. Her clothes caught on fire, and she received third-degree burns that caused her death. Apparently, this is something that caused my mom anguish for several years. I believe my brother Michael was there with her, and apparently Emma and Ardenette were gone. My mother was pregnant with me, so I was not born yet, and my grandmother Leela died just before I was born.
I got a connection. I'm getting something. It's big. It's a midget. No, it's a little boy.
Yes, yes.
I see fire.
Yes, and what else? What else?
Mom, I'm scared. I'm scared.
It's not a wee deep as Marjorie.
Stop, child. You breaking my connection.
Shears, my mother Margie is angry with Grandma Gertrude for banishing her to the closet for the 4th or 5th time. And in reality, when my mother told me these stories, she didn't send her to the closet. She put her in the cedar chest and locked it, and Grandpa Felix would come and get her out. But for the urgency of telling the story and making it simpler and not being charged with child abuse, we use the closet as the place for punishment. In Shears, my mother Margie places Shears in Grandma Gertrude's rocker, and she injures her badly. She is banished to Tulsa, where she goes to live with her mom and her aunts, Aunt Pelly, Aunt Helen, and Aunt Crilly. She finishes middle school in Tulsa. She finishes high school in Tulsa, and being the great reader that she was, she becomes a great scholar and valedictorian of her high school, Booker T. Washington High School in Tulsa, at age 16, where she graduated with a scholarship to Shorter College in Arkansas. Later, you will always see my mom with a cigarette in her hand, socializing, on vacation, but never without a cigarette. My mother was an avid voters' right person, and she registered people to vote all of my life until she was unable to do it. She wore her alligator stiletto pumps until she could not wear them anymore. She was a person who was paid for as a public speaker. She was a gourmet cook for the wealthy Skelly Oil family in Tulsa. She also cooked for the wealthy family that were owners and heirs to the Vigo dog food estate. She actually had correspondence with Jacqueline Kennedy in 1962, I believe is my record, about how to entertain a French ambassador when she worked for the Skellys. And Jacqueline Kennedy wrote her and made suggestions about how to prepare the menu and what to present. When my mother passed away, because of her advocacy for voters' rights, she received wreaths from both the Democratic and the Republican parties. She was an interesting person, and my cousins will attest that she was a character. I tell people that I'm Margie's daughter, and that's why I'm so wired. My mother, Margie Arlette Tucker, I think may have been the bane to my great-grandmother Gertrude's existence. I did not get to meet my Aunt Pelly, but I remember my mother talking about her when she graduated from high school, coming to her graduation. My Aunt Fanny Bell I knew well. I show her as an extension worker in the first part of her scene, and she's teaching a citizen in Taft, a mother, how to cook government canned meat. And she's prim and proper and matter of fact. That's who Aunt Fanny was. In the next scene about stamps, this was a story told to me by Mayor Elsie Gandy Caesar. I did not know Aunt Fanny had been the postmistress in Taft, but the mayor says when she was a little girl, she remembers her being the postmistress. I call her postmaster in the scene because I think in those days they may not have said mistress. She displays her personality in this scene. In the last scene, Catherine Scott gave me this story. Fanny Bell had dual citizenship. She was a citizen of the U.S. as well as Sweden. And we show her packing her bags and telling Felix it's 10 hours to Sweden.
Hi, Mrs. Johnson. I'm Fanny Bell Martin. I'm your government extension worker, and I'm going to show you how to cook that canned government meat. It is not horse meat. First, you cook your vegetables. Do not put any salt in it. The meat is salty. And let it settle. Your family will like it. I've got to go. Next time I'll teach you how to cook those government powdered eggs. You only want one step? 2 cents. Felix, get the rest of the luggage. It's 10 hours to Sweden.
Dewey, Pat, driver, we called him Uncle Pat. When he would come to visit my mom, he always called her Girl. He'd say, "Girl, you're doing good." And I think he had kind of a paternal relationship with her because she was pretty much on her own with us. And he'd walk around the living room, he'd sit, he'd chat with her. He'd stay maybe an hour, and then he'd say, "Girl, I got to go." Dewey, Pat, driver. About 1965, Helen Driver Manuel is teaching Kay Heron, her granddaughter, how to make a chess pie. And apparently, Kay loved this pie, and so Aunt Helen teaches her to make it. And it was important for me to include this scene in the movie because Kay gave me the recipe about 25 years ago. And I'm ashamed to admit that I've lost it. And I hope this scene will redeem me and that she will give me the recipe again. My sister, Sarah Ann Tucker Colbert, said that Aunt Helen's meals every Sunday looked like a Thanksgiving dinner. I never ever saw Aunt Helen when she was not dressed to the nines. She was an impeccable hostess and loved to cook like most of the driver women, and she was a superb cook. Just wonderful meals.
Kay, come and let Grandma show you how to make a chess pie. Since you like it so much, you need to learn how to make it. I've got 5 eggs in this bowl. I put in 2 tablespoons of flour, a table of cornmeal for texture, and that's to make it stick together better. Some warm melted butter, and 2 cups of sugar, and a cup and a half of buttermilk. And last, I'm going to put in the vanilla that gives it flavor, and the cornmeal gives it some consistency. Now, I'm going to pour it into the pie shell that I made this morning. That's good.
About 1945 through 1946, at DeWitt's place, there was poker, there was grain alcohol, there was chalk, there was whiskey, cards, and money. My Uncle DeWitt ran a joint in Tulsa, and my mother, my oldest brother Michael, and my oldest sister Emma lived with him. Apparently, there was lots of activity there, according to my cousin Catherine, as well as my mother Margie. He was a businessman, and according to Catherine, he took care of business. and at DeWitt's place, he was in charge. St. Elmo is Luvinia driver Philip's father, and we called him Uncle Peanut. We called him that because every time without fail when he came to see us, he brought us bags of peanuts. I don't know who else he gave peanuts to, but he always brought them to us. And I thought he was very cool because every time he came to see us, he would bring us peanuts. My Uncle John was called Dude. He is John Dude Driver. He lived in Oklahoma City, and he is shown in this scene in a picture with Uncle Pat and Troy. John was always fascinated that my mother had so many children. When he would come to visit, he would just have this look of awe on his face when he would see us all buzzing around, sometimes getting into things that we should not get into, and chattering nonstop. I think it just amazed him because he only had 2 children. El Reno, and we called her Aunt Crilly, driver, is Catherine Scott's mother, and she is the youngest driver girl of Felix and Gertrude. In this scene, it takes place about 1970.
Hi, my name is Kathy Ann. Myself, my cousin Sarah, and my sister Tracy Louise were at my grandmother Curly's house. Sarah was telling us about relatives have long since passed. We found a Ouija board, and Sarah decided to set up for a seance, and she lit some candles, and we were rocking back and forth, and she was calling out relatives' names. The candles blew out, and we thought we had connected with the dead. We were in the back room of a shotgun house. Now, a shotgun house, you can look from the front door all the way to the back door. And this house is also connected to a beauty shop that had a window that you can climb through to let you into the back room. We ran. We got so scared. We jumped through the window and ran and into that back bedroom and got into my grandmother's Curly's bed, and we covered our heads with the covers. Now my sister, she ran straight out the back door, and me and Sarah was like under the covers, and I said, oh my God, we were so scared, and I was shivering, and I said, it's not going to get me. This ghost is not going to get me.
Did you see that? I'm scared. We should have listened to Aunt Curly.
Shh! Kathy and Sarah, leave that board alone. It's the devil's work. I know you're scared, but you're not sleeping with me.
In the scene with QT's bullet, QT has been caught. A very handsome, strapping young man, handsome driver, has been caught in someone's bedroom with another man's wife, and he gets shot. And Gertrude is annoyed and angry and lets him know that she's not happy with what he's done. But he's her son, and she tries to save his leg.
Mama! Mama, my guts are coming out!
Hush, boy, you've been shot in the leg.
Miss Gertrude, it's gangrene. We're gonna have to amputate.
The good Lord gave my boy 2 legs, and he's gonna go see his maker with 2 legs. whoring around like your daddy Felix, you deserve to be shot. We document our ancestors. We have given you stories of the heart. We have told stories that have come from stories told through oral tradition. We have matched them with legal documents as well as historical documents, and we have shown you photographs that document who our ancestors are.